the theme for this panel discussion, which is all about connecting up our spaces, so strategic collaboration for growth, connecting research landscape through innovation to accelerate commercialisation and deployment, to support growth, to support the clean energy mission. We want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. We're going to first of all hear from Henry, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the latest briefing report on strategic or disruptive innovation and our SRA, and we'll take it from there. So I'll hand over to Henry first of all.
Great. Great. Thanks very much, Deborah, for that introduction. I'm Henry Jeffrey from the University of Edinburgh, and I lead the policy engagement theme within the ORE Supergen Hub. We've heard some great presentations there from GB Energy and from which I think really sort of sets the scene. And what I'd like to do is take you through two initiatives that we're running within Supergen that I think really complement those first two presentations. The first is a report that we released just a couple of months ago, earlier this year, on disruptive innovation and its role in engaging UK growth and competitiveness. And then, as Deborah touched on, our upcoming report, the ORE Strategic Research Accelerator, that pinpoints those areas where we think we can have that disruption and breakthrough technologies. But to begin with, I'd like to sort of take things back a level to sort of what the drivers are in the UK. We have a quote here from Keir Starmer with regard to looking at the drivers with regard to economic growth and our ambitions that we have for both having an industrial plan in the UK and the opportunities for export sales, and Guy spoke a little bit to that. And then another quote then from Ed Miliband looking at our ambitions to become a clean energy superpower in the UK. And it's very clear that the renewable energy sector sits at the interface of those two initiatives. And if we then look at the policies that we have in the UK to enable that happening, we have our modern industrial strategy that Qatar mentioned. We have a Clean Power 2030 action plan. Below that, we have our Clean Power sector plan, and we mentioned about the industrial strategy 8. But if we pick our sector of offshore renewables, then we have the IGP sitting below that. We have the newly formed GB Energy. And we have Supergen that underpins everything that we're doing with regard to innovation and disruptive research leading to UK growth. Last year at the Assembly, we showed the size of the prize with regard to economic benefit and the jobs associated with the deployment and manufacture of ORE in the UK. And it's very clear if you look at the left-hand side of these annulus charts that the vast majority of the economic benefit and jobs comes from the manufacturing of the technology. There's jobs in other areas, there's economic benefit in other areas, but the vast majority is from having the sovereign capability that we're not just deploying, we're also manufacturing the technology that we have there. And that very much speaks to Guy's slides about the energy engineered in the UK. It's so important. So that then takes us to then the two reports that I'll speak about the disruptive innovation and the underpinning role that research and development has in enabling that breakthrough technologies that's going to give us competitiveness and supply chain share, and the strategic research accelerator that pinpoints those areas where we could focus on to have this disruptive breakthrough innovations in research that are going to take the UK to reap those benefits that I mentioned earlier. Now, what I would like to say before I go into that is there is a real urgency for this, because there is almost a tension between the industrial strategy and Clean Power 2030 that we really need to have that industrial capability that Guy was mentioning. We really need to have that right now in order to win supply chain share if we're going to have the benefits associated with deployments associated with Clean Power 2030 and beyond. So there really is an urgency in this happening, and that's why Supergen has taken this initiative in the disruptive innovation and the strategic research accelerator. Now, it's easy to say, sort of disruptive innovation and strategic research accelerator. What does that actually mean? Because if we look at the options associated with that tension and that urgency, there's a few ways that this could play out. We could meet our Clean Power 2030 targets by buying the equipment from somebody else, and we already buy a lot of that equipment from other countries. We could continue to do that and potentially regret that in the future. I think almost certainly we would regret that in the future with regard to lost opportunity. We could slow down to catch up. Now, we have net zero targets for a reason, so this would be very politically unattractive and climatically unattractive. And so what we're proposing within our initiatives is that we disrupt and modernise. We look at the opportunities for having disruptive innovation coming from the research community and then feeding that into a modernised, automated, digitised supply chain to make sure that we reap those economic benefits and jobs that we mentioned earlier on. Now, in order to make that happen, we need to investigate who needs to be involved in this competitiveness and growth. And clearly it needs to be the companies that are developing the technologies, it needs to be the manufacturers of those technologies, but there needs to be a pipeline of innovations and research coming from the academic community to fulfill their breakthrough technologies. It won't be enough for us to do incremental innovations and incremental change. We will need to have disruption in order to ensure that we get that economic benefit and growth that will be essential for UK growth overall. And Guy mentioned here about sort of being, world leading. World leading in this diagram means being in the top right-hand corner, that we need to have strong UK capability in high value areas. And so I think in Guy's slides where he was mentioning about sort of making sure that we capture those high value areas, we need to make sure that the UK, and in a lot of areas in ORE deployment, certainly in offshore wind, where we buy the bulk of the technology from other countries, we're sitting in the top left-hand corner, the high value areas where we do not have a world-leading capability yet. And so there is this then importance that we have this disruptive innovation to propel ourselves into the top right-hand corner to reap that economic benefit and growth. And so how do we do that? And that is the heart of the first report and the disruptive innovation. We looked at connected pathways of having pathway one on the left-hand side that looks at the disruptive innovation in the research community linked to the research infrastructure. Deborah mentioned about the ACTOR programme, having innovation infrastructure linked to the R&D and then the workforce, and much of the workforce is sitting in this room. But that needs to be then connected to pathway two, which is the industrial modernisation, making sure that we have manufacturing companies that are automated and digitised in order to make sure that we're not just inventing the best breakthrough technology, we're also manufacturing that breakthrough technology, and there is a connection between these two pathways so that we're able to reap the vast majority of the benefits. So looking at which areas that we should focus on, because there will need to be a prioritisation, but here you can see that whether it is offshore wind, whether it is wave, whether it is tidal, there is a lot of commonality between the areas from recyclable blades to composites to next generation power takeoff, irrespective of the technology. So the investment can be quite common, and that's where our next report, the Strategic Research Accelerator, comes in. Deborah mentioned in her opening speech about looking at the areas of next generation technologies, industrial foundations that Guy mentioned for deep water wind, all the way through to electrical cables and processes and services. But what does that actually look like when we then identify what the underpinning research and innovations are that are going to bring those disruptions? And we have a couple of deep dive examples here of looking at the step changes that we can have in recyclable blades, looking at novel power takeoffs, and when I say novel, not just a little bit better than we were before, making sure that there is disruption moving to the next generation, such as superconducting generators, all the way through to that deep water foundations that Guy was mentioning, and then looking at then the modelling of the array prediction, making sure that you can have the most efficient and effective design envelopes so you're being as competitive as you possibly can be. So I am going to finish up here. Rosie is telling me that I'm out of time, but this is very much about overtaking, not catching up. We have a real opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity, I would say, to make sure that those ambitious targets that we have for net zero are also a socio-economic opportunity. If we don't capture the prize, then our overseas competitors certainly will. And I think what we have within these Supergen initiatives of Disrupt and Modernise Ecosystem and the Strategic Research Accelerator, we have an integrated strategy to make sure that we can shape the UK sector for years to come and really play a role in feeding in to the work that the GB Energy is doing. Hopefully I've made clear that research and innovation is really key to underpin this. We all have a role, everybody on this panel has a role. I would say even more importantly, everybody in this room has a role with regard to the research that they're doing to feed into these disruptions that will take the UK forward. Thanks very much.
We'd like to ask the panelists just introduce yourselves and give any sort of framing or changes. You have some slides, I think.
Yes.
Shall I move them forward from here for you?
Yeah, it's just one, yes,
Yeah.
that's fine. There we go. Good morning, my name is Guilherme Castro. I'm still using the new Innovation Manager for Offshore Wind in the Crown State. I don't know until when I can do that, like 6 months in a row. But before I jump into the presentation, if you don't know the Crown State, we are responsible for managing the seabed for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So whenever you see a new offshore wind project or offshore renewable technology going into the development, it all started with us leasing a piece of the seabed for the developers. And this is happening now, so we recently announced our intention to do the round 6, which is quite exciting because it keeps the momentum that we are seeing into the market in terms of development. And this is really well connected to the first point in the slide. So this is how we mainly support the 3 grouping activities that we have in terms of development and supporting the development of the sector. So whenever we talk about the leasing aspects, we have visibility of the seabed, and a big part of the market demands us. We want to see exactly, we want to understand what will be the pipeline, how much gigawatts are you expecting to lease, and this signposting is quite important, and that's part of the work we are doing with the Marine Delivery Roadmap. So this is a spatial planning tool which will allow users to have to do long-term scenario planning and full visibility of where we expect different sectors to coexist or co-locate, including offshore wind technologies, but also fishing, telcos, you name it. And then the other 2 aspects there is how we support the market with direct investment. I need to inform that the supply chain accelerator is coming from going for cohort 3. So if you're interested, please sign it for it. But the supply chain SCA, as we call it, is a 50 million investment that we do in development and support for stage companies. And it's going to the cohort 3, so we had already deployed 25 million in support. And the third one is looking into the infrastructure that we need, the ports and the supply chain development, like manufacturing, linked, in this case, 350 million in support that we have in terms of capital investment. But you're probably looking now and saying, where is innovation, right? Like how there is nothing mentioned there. And I think as we're growing, developing the new strategy, we will probably see a 1.5 in this slide in the future. And probably connect is a really good word for complementing what we are seeing here in terms of the areas we focus. And why connect? Because when we see the signpost there, and we understand the seabed challenge that we have for the future, both in terms of how we reduce LCOE costs, but also the technical risks that the technology and the seabed conditions impose to us. This can be translated into a challenge. Really key challenge that for some of them, we don't have the solutions today developed. But then when you look to the continuation of the supply chain support, this comes into a really late stage of that journey. So for us, I see innovation as this connection, is the bridge that will come into translating the challenge into the innovation ecosystem, so we can build a healthy pipeline of solutions that will come to place when these projects are going to construction and development. Without that, it's really hard for us, and I think it's a transition of TC role in terms of innovation from being passive, expecting these solutions to come into place, and leveraging the information we have with the visibility. And I think this is a differentiator of how the seabed conditions are imposing us to, for example, go into deep water and then define this challenge and put it back to the ecosystem and saying, how do we fix that? And I think this is not just us, it's for sure a collaboration. So we are connecting the dots, but also collaborating with all the stakeholders, like GB in the commercialization program. I think it's a great example of how we are looking into this and saying, how can we support, how can we accelerate and build this pipeline of solutions to the challenges that we're seeing. So, quick snapshot in how we're seeing innovation and how we're connecting the dots into the work we do today. And happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Guillaume. Thank you for that. And let's introduce Andy McDonald from Oric.
Thank you, Deborah, and delighted to be here. There's some really inspiring stuff even just after the first kind of half hour or so thank you to my colleagues on that. So I'm Andy McDonald, I'm Director of Business Development at Offshore Renewable Energy Capital. The Capital is one of a network of catapults set up by the UK government to support economic growth through innovation and technology. So that's what we're here to do, predominantly offshore wind, but we do some wind and tidal as well. So my background, originally I worked on tidal for 4 years, and then I've got a lot of sympathy with the activity going on in tidal, but over the last number of years more focused on offshore wind. So we're here to support companies with innovation and commercialisation. We do that through our facilities. We've got world-class facilities across the UK, a lot around Blyth, but we've also got offices up in Aberdeen, Grimsby, Cornwall, and in Wales as well to support companies. So we do it through our facilities, testing blades over 100 metres. Drivetrains, we're expanding to be able to test drivetrains up to 25. A megawatt capability, electrical testing, both for dynamic and a static cable. So we've got a huge range of world-class facilities to support companies. But fundamentally, it's about the people as well. We've got about 300 staff, predominantly engineers and researchers, who want to work with companies to help them to grow. And our focus very much is supporting companies through that growth. So we're really keen to link up with the academic community, really keen to take ideas. We can do that either by working on Horizon projects, on Innovate UK projects, working directly with universities. We also support ID Core and other training centre PhDs as well. So really well engaged, and that's where a lot of the best ideas are coming from. If there's 2 points that kind of like to make, and I'll make them, and then we can pass on and come to them later. So one is just picking up on what Henry said, which is absolutely fundamental about how the R&D side is what's needed to give us that economic growth. And what we've seen across the sector, we've seen a lot of funding coming in for companies. I think that's really, really important. So some of the work that Hugh's talking about through the supply chain accelerator, what GB Energy are doing, focused on companies. There's a lot of problems that the industry won't solve just through single companies. We need that underpinning research to fix those. And the second one is a more positive one, actually, just to see the people on the panel here, and there's a lot of people in the room here as well, showing that I think we're maturing as a sector. We're having really good discussions on subjects like hybrid foundations, where we're actually coming together and getting the technology, the policy, the leasing together in very quick order to enable things to move forward faster as a sector. So I think, a positive point, we're really maturing as a sector.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to have that positive note as well. Thank you for that. Tim.
Right. Hi everybody. Great to see such a full room and such an interesting panel. So I will be brief. Tim Starr, Professor of Offshore Renewable Energy Engineering at the University of Manchester and co-director on the Hub. So Deborah and Henry already introduced several aspects of our work. I think we've heard a number of interesting things. I'll just pick up on one phrase that Guy used. It's key in this research space to connect ideas to ensure effective delivery. And we've heard a number of mechanisms by which different stakeholder groups can engage, from the research community through to policymakers, through to just particular industrial stakeholders, and as Andy was saying, with groups of stakeholders in the industry. I've been involved in a number of projects, as several of you know, from ETI projects through European Interreg projects and European sort of standard development projects over the years. I think there's a number of interesting aspects of how collaboration frameworks can be set up to encourage these kinds of connections of early stage ideas with the late stage policy uptake and cross-sector industry demands or challenges that are faced. So whilst we've covered a number of topics, and you'll see more about Strategic Research Accelerator in terms of the priorities that we see, I think there's some further discussion to be had about what mechanisms need to be in place to support those stakeholder connections across the community. And we've seen a number of new initiatives mentioned today. But I look forward to discussing them further.
Thanks, Tim. Over to you, Jim.
I should probably be brief because Carol's already said quite a lot from the UKRI point of view. So I'm Jim Fleming, I'm one of the heads of the Clean Energy team at UKSLC. I've worked for UKSLC, as I like to say, since the last millennium. I had my 27th anniversary a couple of weeks ago of working for UKSLC. And certainly what Carol said about the amount of change within UKRI, it's not hyperbole, there was a lot of change. I spent the last 10 years as head of, I started as head of energy and then head of energy decarbonisation, head of clean energy. And certainly if you were to look at how we were trying to fund research, it was very much about 10 years ago about how do we provide the technologies and the system thinking to make sure that we had the tools to meet the energy trilemma. How do we have a resilient, decarbonised energy system that was equally sort of going to save money as well? And those things are just as important as they ever were. I think the difference now is if we make those, the thinking then was very much around if we make those correct choices, that if you move first, then that leads to growth and to jobs. The focus now from UKRI is slightly twisted around in the clean energy space, and very much the focus across UKRI is how do we produce growth, how do we create more jobs. But certainly with what we've seen recently is that point around that how do we keep a resilient UK energy system has been shown to be, if anything, even more important than ever. So those, I think those things don't go away. In terms of the details, I'm afraid we're a little bit, as Carol's already said, a little bit still working through that. But I think the other thing to point out is there's lots of change across the energy innovation ecosystem and how we work with GB Energy. It was a relatively new team. How we work, innovate just as closely as we always have, perhaps even more so, and how do we work across both the technology side of things and the environmental science side of things. I think one of the exciting things that we hope to see going forward is how we work as UKRI in a slightly more joined up way than we perhaps had in the past.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, and for Guy and Henry, I think just if you've got any points you'd like to make from what you've already heard, to add to what you've already said to us all, and then we'll move on to open up to questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think all I'd add is that it's clear that everyone, I think particularly from what you were saying earlier, Henry, is that everyone's sort of aligned on this ambition that we have to make sure that we are maximising what we get in the UK out of the clean energy transition. I think the challenge for us is that we're all from different organisations. We're all coming on the scene at different stages, like GB Energy. It's been noted, it was only formed as an organisation, we only existed from about May, I think. So how do we make sure that as these new organisations appear, that we're all sort of singing from the same hymn sheet and aligned on the same purpose? I mean, we're obviously, we've got a good start on the basis that like at a high level we all agree, but I think then it turns into the practical, how do we actually work together? What are the things that we sort of complement each other on? How do we make sure we're realising those synergies? So I'm sort of interested to get into that a bit in the panel discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that the guy said there. I would say that probably the main challenge may be in that prioritisation, that it's unlikely that we're going to be market leaders in every single component of this sector. And so choosing or picking winners, which has been, government's something the government has not wanted to do, maybe it's an uncomfortable position when you pick a loser. I think that's something that we're going to have to start to become more comfortable with in order to prioritise the investment and get us all aligned. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Pick a loser. Just pick a loser. Okay. So my kids say to me, who's favourite? I say, we don't have any favourites, I have some other favourites. Okay, so let's open up to the room, and so this is your chance to get involved with the discussion, ask some questions. We've got some great ones in Slido already, but I'd like to have them presented from the room if possible. So, hands up if you would like to speak one of the questions out. So, Aka, you're first. Professor Hodge. Is that not working? Oh, yes.
Thanks very much for the panelists for introducing themselves. Thanks for this event, really amazing. Obviously, Guy, you'll be hit with many questions, so my first question is around you. I'm really sorry. I was intrigued by one of the slides that you had in there, which is investing in communities. And I just wanted you, if you can, I know you're such a young entity, unpack that for us. Is it investing in communities, energy plans? Is it investing in projects? Are you going to develop, for example, a project at the village, city, town scale? What are the concepts around investing in communities, please?
Yeah, cool. So I guess the first thing to say is that we published our local power plan quite recently, and the purpose of that plan is to effectively set out how we are going to work with local community energy groups to support them as they progress initiatives to develop power, as you say, in communities at a very small scale. I think it's one of the things that we see, if you take a step back and think about what are we here to achieve as GB Energy, it's about making sure the public feels like they have a real stake in the transition and they own the transition to some extent. From my perspective in supply chain, that's about creating jobs and showing tangible improvements in kind of people's economic outlook. I think community energy is another vital link because it shows people, renewable energy can have a direct impact on me and reduce my bills in my home, my community. Our team was up in Orkney with, say, Dan, CEO, and one of the people in the supply chain team was up in Orkney recently looking at the kind of onshore scheme they have there. And what they've been able to achieve through that, not just in terms of how they recycle the returns they deliver back into, for example, providing ferry services for people to be able to go to work and go to the pub after work, as vitally important as that is, but also just like the kind of buy-in that generates for renewable energy in the community, we see as really, really important. So that's sort of a very waffly way of saying we're here to kind of support in a financial sense those projects to make sure that communities do feel those tangible benefits.
Very much. I think we've got a question over here. Yeah. Please do introduce yourselves as you ask the question. The roving mic will come to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Ajay Boyer, Head of Supply Chain at Renewable UK and Delivery Lead for Supply Chain within the Offshore Wind Industry Council. I have a reflection and a question. My reflection is that whilst Guy has just touched upon cutting costs for local people, I think one of the things that's been missed in the conversation at the moment ties into the point around social license. Specifically, how can we demonstrate that our industry is cutting costs We won the argument in the 2010s through innovation by cutting the cost of offshore renewables significantly, specifically offshore wind, and that actually gave us the ability to demonstrate that offshore wind would become the backbone of the UK's energy system. More recently, the costs have increased for various reasons, but I think I would like to understand what Pam's thoughts are on how innovation can help us to reduce the cost of offshore wind, and indeed wonder how today's programme will reflect that. I do have a sort of question for, is it Kedar, who gave one of the keynote speeches? It's so crucial, I think, that we would consider and reflect how the work we're doing connects to the industrial strategy. I think one of the things I found with the ISAs is that they seem to be thinking in a very siloed way, so I was curious to understand how are the innovations and the activities actually working across the ISA and including foundational sectors, including steel as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. So, shall we start with the specific question for Kedar, or would you prefer Jim to? Yeah, Jim to do that, and then we'll take views from across the panel on the first question. Thank you.
I think it's a really great question. I think there are things that we are still working through. But I think it relates to a point I made earlier. So there are things that we are still working through, particularly on how we connect. As you say, the industrial strategy is very technology focused, not even sector focused. So how we actually connect those up into a coherent program is something we're still working through. And then secondly, obviously, the point comes around how we're connecting with the other industrial strategy areas, which we are a little bit further away on. So you mentioned manufacturing. I think absolutely that's critical, but we can go further on other parts around defence, around AI and so on. So there's a lot of work, agreed. The question is absolutely right. We don't have the answers yet, but we need to get them, yes.
Thank you. Any thoughts on the other part of the question around cost reduction and current climate?
I think it's a fair challenge in terms of understanding the next wave of how we're going to reduce cost for the technology. And I think it's a good example of what Flowlight is trying to do. And whenever we are trying to think the requirements of innovation, you look to the sector, and I think Guy mentioned this aspect, we are aligned on this top layer, but when you go to operationalization, you have multiple roadmaps, you have multiple directions, sometimes different agendas playing to the innovation aspect. And certain areas, I think, of the sector needs this one unique, single understanding that that is the direction of travel, and that's how we're going to present, and the actions that we need to implement as institutions. And then we build our individual agendas aligned on the same North Star that we have there. I think a risk sometimes on the innovation responsibility is just thinking on the early stage, and I try to bring a more pragmatic perspective that we have challenges that we don't have solutions available. It doesn't mean it is just early stage on the research. It can be not, and also not only technology and hardware. We need to discuss how we can innovate on policy and regulation that will enable certain technologies that are already validated from a hardware perspective to be deployed and achieve commercialization faster. So I think when we can gather the sector together, as Flowlight is doing at the moment, and with a clear lens on what is the pathway for cost reduction, but really connected with innovation. So we can say what is from supply chain innovation, what is from logistics and vessel innovation, what is from the foundation hardware innovation that we need, but also what are the complementary activities that will enable us to have this direction of travel.
Okay, thank you. So pathways to cost reduction, yes.
Yeah, just picking on that. I mean, actually, the whole kind of cost reduction is a huge challenge. And I've been working offshore wind 13, 14 years now, and the drivers actually have changed from a net zero through to a economic growth, through to a energy security, and now looking at, it's kind of swinging back to cost reduction as well. So the solution is always the same. It's make things cheaper, use low carbon energy. So we're always heading in the right direction. But at the moment, cost reduction absolutely has to be the number one priority in everything that we're doing. And I'd come back to Henry's the report he was talking about. You know, there's two ways we're doing that. We're either leapfrogging through innovation, which is where, you know, this audience, I think, has an absolutely key role to be playing, or else we're reducing costs in a more organic way through industrialisation, and both of those are really important in how we do that.
Tim?
Yeah, so cost reduction. It's a big thing for all of the technologies we're looking at. We're just starting at different stages, right? But there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in early stage research that can pull through. I think is an answer here. I mean, across various facets, improvements in the production processes, improvements in the modelling tools that we rely on to design these systems in the first place, that enables us to design to narrow margins, to operate existing assets for longer by appropriate and optimise use of control strategies to maximise the yield from the assets that we've got. And then a whole suite of activities around this sort of autonomy space where there's a potential for reduction of O&M costs net by reducing the amount of risk that people are exposed to as well. So I think an aspect here is pulling through early stage research rapidly and ensuring it's certified for offshore use or for production processes rapidly, which links to these earlier points of connecting stakeholders across the community, accelerating pull through. And a lot of these UK bucket 3 opportunities, mechanisms, the GB Energy, the Crown Estate, may well be enabling some of those to pull through further. But as Henry was saying, there's to have some prioritisation to do to maximise which ones of those pull through to have the maximum impact on cost reduction rate.
Yeah, I'd sort of build on what Tim said. Like, we've been looking quite closely at how we can play a role in reducing costs, particularly in flown deep water wind. And innovation obviously plays a vital role in reducing the sort of capital requirements for a particular unit. So Floating found it like, I'm not an engineer by background, but we've spoken to many, many different foundation designers, and almost every single one of them presents a relatively compelling case for how their particular design is going to reduce costs, usually by a relatively significant amount for every single one of them. But what is, I think, missing is that, Ajay, you mentioned that costs have been going up in fixed bottom wind. Like, it's amazing how much of the increase in cost in fixed wind is due to the cost of financing. And that's just like, the base rate was 4%, and it was 0.5%. Like, just that fundamental fact, I think, is missed. And then, one of the things that we found is that, you can reduce LCOE by a significant amount by reducing the capital cost. But if you reduce the weighted average cost of capital, i.e. the cost of your financing, by 1%, you can reduce LCOE by like 4 to 7%. So, and the way you reduce financing costs, as Tim says, is by proving these things. So I think the innovation ecosystem is doing a fantastic job of bringing forward amazing designs for how we can really, massively cut chunks out of the cost of these things. I think the role of bodies like GB and Crown Estate and others is how do we get them in the water so that we can prove to insurers and to banks that they actually work.
Yes, thank you. And we are running out of time for this session, so we need to move on to sort of some final thoughts from everybody. I think that point around the cost of financing and how significant that is in terms of the viability of projects going forward is really important. And actually, for those, all of us in this room, those of you working on research projects, understanding how they fit in and how they might affect that is really key. So lots of work around de-risking and new technologies and refining designs, reducing uncertainty, and so on. And all of that has a really direct impact in improving modelling tools in terms of reducing the cost of financing and therefore the risk of the project. So I think it's on all of us in the room to be clear on what our research is and where it's going to create that sort of impact. But I'm now going to go back to the panel for just a final brief thought from each of them, what they've heard today. I think as you get from what we've been saying so far, we're very keen to see the underpinning research being pulled through and drawn in to help with the ambitions of each of these bodies in the sector, and we're very keen to engage through the next stages of the SRA to make sure it also fits well with the different innovations you've all talked about developing within your organisation. So shall we start at the far end and then come back through to Henry as the final word?
I think that the main point for me today is the aspect of how we connect the agenda and guarantee that we are giving the right signal for Supergen and the academia and the research environment of the priorities we need. What are the challenges that we're seeing today, but also kind of a foresight of innovation, what is coming through the pipeline. So research is aligned and producing this pipeline of solutions and innovations that we can facilitate and accelerate as we progress. Thank you.
Thank you. I can give you a list of what I think the priority areas are for you guys who won't. I'll undoubtedly be wrong. And I think we're sometimes guilty of going through the same list of things and saying this is what we should focus on. What I'm really, really interested in is hearing the unknown unknowns. So what are the things that we haven't even thought of that might have an impact on some of the challenges that we've got? So that's the challenge I would say you tell us things that we don't know, and we'll stop telling you things that you know already.
Yes, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground across the session, I guess. I think we've talked quite a bit about disruptive technologies, I suppose, just to flag that it's also disruptive processes, right? Even in the extent of how things are proven to be sufficiently robust and reliable and predictable for adoption. I mean, as Guy was saying, historically it's getting things in the seat, demonstrating that they work for a period of time. But the acceleration and the great confidence we've got in modelling tools, tank testing capabilities, not just tank testing, scale testing across various systems, may allow condensing of those proving timescales as well. So disruption of processes as well as disruption of technologies.
Thanks. The session's actually flown by for me. I think a common theme has come up a lot is connectivity, and I think it's a real testament to the work that Supergen's done. Is I think most of the people we need in the room are here in the room now. And so how do we keep that connectivity going forward is really key for how we actually achieve success.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree on that. I think sort of from a very selfish perspective, we're pulling together our investment strategy for supply chain, and I want to make sure that that strategy is aligned with where organisations like Supergen think we should be focusing our efforts. And so the key takeaway for me is just thinking all the great stuff that Deborah presented, I want to make sure that's reflected in how we actually go out to market.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it back to cost reduction. And I think, Andy, it's something we've discussed about sort of overall cost reduction is about being better, not necessarily just being cheaper. And being better is certainly fueled by disruptive innovation, not incremental innovation. So I think what we want to end up with is not just the best value for the bill payer, but the best value for the economy and the economic benefit and jobs, so we can ensure that this ORE sector plays a strategic role in enabling the UK to meet its economic and growth ambitions.
Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much to the audience for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through to all of those in the Slido, but you can catch them in the break. And so we now have a break. We have a break outside with coffee and refreshments. Please go and have a look at the posters, meet the researchers. The posters are in room 01, that's on the right hand side at the top there. Please be back in the room for the next session which will start at 11:10, where we will get into a bit more detail in some of the emerging research. Thank you very much again to our panel.